where else is everybody from? Cape Town, Sussex, Botswana. So the usual smattering of people from a similar time zone. We don't have any folks from America at the moment. I think they're quite busy.
I wonder why.
Yeah, they're preoccupied with other things. And we're all watching anxiously because that has a lot to do, a very powerful effect on the business of safari and conservation. But we're not going to, I think we're all sick and tired of that conversation, so we're going to move on from there.
You've got Jeanette. Jeanette's in from the US.
Oh, there. Oh, good. Good. Have you let her in? Yes. Okay. So you folks all know Carmen from Soul Hub. This is her forum, as you know, and she's been running Soul Hub for some time, still is. There's a lot of stuff that goes on the Soul Hub forum. And this is just one of many ways of participating in something that makes you feel good and makes your soul sing. I just want to say, as always, thank you, Carmen, for right back in March suggesting that we do this thing when we used to do it weekly. As you know, now we do it monthly on the first Thursday of every month. But Carmen and Soul Hub, as always, thank you for hosting us and for creating this platform. We'll get together.
Do a plug then. Can I just mention, Fiona's going to be doing cooking, so we're going to start cooking Mondays, getting us ready for Christmas. So if you want to learn how to make gin or mince pies, we'll be doing cooking on Mondays. On
Christmas gin and chutneys.
Exactly. We've also got dancing on Thursday evenings and Saturdays, and we've got singing, community singing, and a live kind of pubby sing-song on alternative Sundays. So there's a few other options if you want to. Just thought I'd let you know. Head over to, I'll leave it in the chat so you can find us whenever, wherever you have a quiet night in.
Good. Will you? Okay, you're going to put it in the chat box down there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So this evening, folks, we're going to be talking about the myths, some of the myths, and the secrets of guiding. And to help me do that is Grant Nel, who you've heard speak here before. He's up in Kasane in Botswana, and he's known to some of you in this forum already. And I'll be giving him an opportunity. I've got absolutely no idea what he's going to be talking about, which is part of the excitement.
Neither do I, actually.
But as usual, I guess we're just going to make it up as we go. But the focus is around some of the myths and secrets that create a guided experience on safari. If you do hear banging in the background, it's the 5th of November. It's Guy Fawkes Night. I remember that was something that as a kid in South Africa we used to celebrate. And there would be literally bonfires, and we'd burn the guy, and there'd be crackers and rockets and Catherine wheels and all that sort of thing. Seems to have pretty much died out as a tradition in South Africa, but it hasn't here. And although there's no great bonfires burning in public because we've just gone into lockdown for a month as of today, as of this morning, there's plenty of people celebrating privately in their own back gardens. So if you do hear explosions, it's not the Civil War, it's just the neighbors. And it's nice to see and to hear that people are just getting on with their lives in the best way they possibly can, which is what we all need to do. So just to put you in the picture, ongoing, Confessions of an African Safari Guide, which is the book that I wrote, which is this one, the second book, I'm excited to tell you, is probably going to go to Kindle. I still have to get confirmation of this, but will be on Kindle from tomorrow or in the next few days. And most of the people who access the book via Amazon choose the Kindle option. Obviously, you can just download it. It's cheaper and it's easier and it's more portable. So I'm very excited that that is going to happen. And then the Audible version is in process. It's all been uploaded. It's with the American company that controls it. They're going through all the files at the moment. And within the next 2 to 3 weeks, if they approve it, which I have no doubt that they will, then it will go live as well. And then after that, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do because I guess I'll just have to write another book. But I'm excited to say that both of the books will be available in all three formats. Africa Bites already is, and Confessions very soon. And so let's get on to some stories, and they come from Confessions of an African Safari Guide. And this goes around, I want to start off with a couple of myths. Now, my dad and my mom are on. I'm not sure if they can hear me. Kelson, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, thumb up. So he'll recognize this first story because he actually told it to me. And it's one of the myths. This is not in the book, by the way, but it's just come to mind. I'm starting with two myths about birds, African birds. And one of the myths is the story of the yellow-billed kite. Now, the yellow-billed kite is a very common raptor in southern Africa, and it migrates to Central Africa during the Southern African winter. It disappears entirely. And one of the ways you mark the seasons, as you do with the swallows, is you wait for the first swallow you see, the first cuckoo you hear calling, red-chested cuckoo calling, or the first yellow-billed kite that you see marks the onset of spring. Now, we know, because we can track these birds very accurately these days, where the kites go. But the story that the Zulus told my dad, if I get the story correctly, was that if when asked where the yellow-billed kites went, and these are large raptors, they believed that they retreated into the cliffs and crevices in the mountains in South Africa, where they shed all their feathers, and they would creep in amongst the craps. That is to say, cracks. They would creep in amongst the cracks and crevices of the cliff. That's alliteration, by the way, where they would shed their feathers and they would spend the winter in hibernation, basically. So the reason you didn't see them wasn't because they weren't there. It was simply because they were hiding. And this is a myth that was very firmly adhered to in the day. And the thing about myths is that they hold truths for certain people. And there's absolutely no way that you can convince people that they're not true. They believe them, and that's that. And as we've discussed before, quite often the story is given to them from their ancestors, quite often from their grandmother. And who's going to gainsay your grandmother, right? If she knows, she knows. It is known. So that's where yellow-billed kites go. They creep away and they disappear, and there's no such thing as migration. That's a ridiculous thing to think. They disappear because they're hiding. Now, I want to tell you another story, and this one is about another bird, and it's a small black bird. It's bigger than a starling, but it's smaller than a pigeon, and it's known as the fork-tailed drongo. Drongo. Now, if you were to use the word drongo, and Australians were in your presence in that conversation, they would assume that you were referring to a person. Because a drongo in Australia is a stupid person. If you called a drongo, it is very uncomplimentary. As I grew up, I started to encounter that in literature, and I used to wonder why on earth that was the case. Because I was very familiar with the drongos of Southern Africa, square-tailed drongo and the fork-tailed drongo, the more common of the two. And I used to wonder how those two matched up. And I did a bit of research on this. And it turns out that drongos are New World birds, or rather Old World birds, and they exist in Africa. They exist in Malaysia and Southeastern Asia. They exist in Australia, and they exist in India. There are drongos spread across that part of the globe. Many different species of drongos, and almost without exception, a drongo is jet, shiny black. In the 1920s, in Australia, there was a famous racehorse. It was famous because it never, ever won a race. It came second many times, but it never won a race, and it was jet black. And apparently the story goes, and this too could be a myth, but it's a fondly held one in Australia, that horse, of course, was a loser. And so anybody who's described in Australia today is a drongo because they were never particularly good at anything, or these days they're regarded as stupid. The prime minister is often referred to as the damn drongo, for example. So I now take you to Zimbabwe, to the western edge of Zimbabwe, Hwange National Park, and a lodge there, a small tented camp called Makalolo, which is one of my favorite places on earth. I've been there many times. And there's a guide there, and his name is Blessing. And Blessing and I were on game drive one day. And it was winter, and the grass was tall and very dry and combustible. And there was a fire burning. I think a natural felt fire, possibly a lightning strike. It's hard to know what creates or causes these fires. It wasn't particularly dangerous, and it was being brought under control by the use of fire breaks, which is graded roads. So if you grade a road, you remove all the fodder, all the stuff that can burn. And that means that as the wind sweeps the fire towards the fire break, it then dies at that point because it can't burn any further. In theory, it all depends on the wind though. Sometimes fires will jump a fire break. And what you do to protect your lodges is you grade a big road right around the lodge, a big wide road, 30 or 40 meters, and you remove all the fuel so that if there is a fire which breaks and is out of control, and if there's a big wind, these fires travel at a tremendous speed, then your lodge or your home or your crops or your cattle will be protected from this fire. Now, fires are a very normal and natural part of the landscape, particularly in Africa. They always have been. These days, if you're managing the land, you can control the fires. In theory, you control the fires, and you burn off certain parts of a farm or a game reserve in a controlled manner. In this particular case, as I was out on game drive from Makalolo with Blessing, there was a fire raging which had been brought under control, and we discussed the fire. And as it swept through the grassland, it drives insects and small animals and birds out of the grass. They have to flee. It can have a tremendously devastating effect on small mammals, mongooses, on tortoises, on chameleons and lizards and reptiles and snakes, and on small nesting birds, and on insects. The drongo, in the African sense, is anything but stupid. It's a very intelligent bird as birds go. It has the ability, for example, to mimic other birds. It can mimic house cats, for example. It's a fantastic mimic, and it's very clever at stealing food from other birds. It's a rapacious bird. And also, when the fires burn, they start to gather in numbers. Normally, a drongo will follow a herd of zebras or wildebeest or an elephant or buffaloes, any mammal that walks through the grass and chases up insects. And as those insects are chased up in the normal course of walking about, the drongo will swoop down from its perch and grab a butterfly or a cricket or any kind of flying insect, or possibly one that's on the ground, grab it, fly back to its perch, beat it to death, kill it, and then swallow it head first. But when the fires are burning, the insects are flying out in thousands upon thousands. And if it's out of control and it's raging so fast that the small ground-dwelling animals can't escape, they get charred and burnt, things like chameleons. And that's feeding time for drongos and other animals, other birds. And if the fire is being forced by a strong, hot wind, it's virtually unstoppable. And the drongos gather in their scores. And that's what was happening as I sat there with Blessing. And they would swoop in and they would catch insects and they'd fly back to the tree and they'd devour them. Time and time and time again, squadrons of drongos sally hunting out from their branches, snatching up a half-charred insect, flying back to the branch and eating it. And Blessing said to me, "We don't like these birds." And I said, "Why do you not like them? What is not to like about the drongo? It's a clever bird." He said, "Because the drongo is a bird of the devil. These birds are controlled by Satan. They are agents of doom and darkness and blackness. Can you see what they're doing?" And I said, "Well, what I can see is that they're flying up and catching flying insects and then eating them. What else am I supposed to be looking at here?" And he said, "No, you're missing the essential point." He said, "When the fire gets to the fire break, where the fire ought to stop, where we have graded a road or we've burnt a back break so that the fire will not burn any further, these birds, you can watch them, will fly up into the smoke, into that turmoil, and they'll take a burning ember, they'll take a piece of grass that's alight, and they'll catch it in their beak. And they then fly across the fire break and they drop it in the grass. And then that fire break, then that patch of grass catches alight, and so the fire continues. And they do this time and time again." I said, "Gosh, Blessing, I am surprised to hear this. I had no idea that these birds were so naughty." He said, "They do the work of the devil. That's why they're black. And that's why they have a forked tail. That is why they are called fork-tailed drongos, because the devil has a fork. He walks with a forked tail and he carries a fork in his right hand. The fork-tailed drongo is called that because it does the devil's work. It is known. Everyone knows this." I said to him, "Well, now I know too. Thank you very much for teaching me, Blessing." Now, and that is as far as that discussion went, because when you encounter a myth like that, and of course, if Blessing was sitting here this evening, he'd be jolly cross with me for calling it a myth, because as far as he's concerned, it's absolute and apparent, literal, observable truth. Now, Grant, what do you think about Blessing's theory?
I'm sitting here chuckling away. I have heard it before. I haven't heard them called the devil, but I have heard guys say to me before that they start the fire. And, you know, and I've always wondered about that, and I've never seen it. But anyway, yeah, a myth is something that's very hard to get out of somebody's head.
Yeah. So that's one of the myths about the drongo. I want to, and I have several of those kinds of stories to tell you this evening. The thing about guiding is that the thing about going on holiday and being guided is that you never quite know who you're going to encounter. And I spoke a month ago about giving the guides permission to get into their stories, because they do want to entertain you. And sometimes they can't always get a very accurate read on the clients that they're with. They want permission to tell those kinds of stories. And unfortunately, because of our Western education, quite often we poo-poo that sort of stuff and say, well, that's just ridiculous. It's clear that they're not doing that. All they're doing is catching burning insects in the sky, you know. And then after that, you'll get no more of those stories from people like Blessing, and that will be to your disadvantage, because you really, really want to encourage that kind of storytelling. Whether it's true or not is of no consequence, because as guides, you're entertainers. Grant, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. In fact, there's, and I was going to bring it up when I came on, but the only place I've ever been where the guides actually guide according to myth, 100%, is in in Australia. If you go to Uluru, which is also known as Ayers Rock, or used to be known as Ayers Rock, as soon as you enter the national park there, any of the registered guides are no longer permitted to guide on the geology of Ayers Rock or on the animals of Ayers Rock as we know, as we would guide it. They can only guide according to the Aboriginal myths, the dream time, how everything was created by the animals and the first creators, what they call chukapa, which is sort of like fables. And any registered guide, and there are a lot of Western guides there, as soon as they enter the national park, they are not allowed by law to guide with any other information except the mythical information. And it's remarkable and wonderful to have a whole guiding experience there, wholly on the myths, the Aboriginal myths. It's fantastic.
Fantastic. So one of the things I do, of course, is guide training, and I try to focus. Most of the guides, the young guides these days, are not white people like us. They tend to be black Namibians or Zimbabweans or Zambians or whatever, and they suffer under this illusion that they need a guide like people like me or Grant. And sometimes they try to, and sometimes they do it very, very well. And sometimes they lose, I think, Grant, they lose, they spend so much time copying us and, looking at the reference books and learning the names of plants in, the botanic names, etc. And I think sometimes something is lost when they're not guiding, telling their own stories. And I think they lose some sort of authenticity. What do you think?
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's a difference between guiding with myths told to you by your ancestors or your grandmother or whatever, to guiding with myths that is just absolute misinformation, which I'll talk a little bit about. But yeah, I agree with you. I love it when I am with a guide who's happy to say, my people believe that, and then they tell the whole mythical story. I love it when they add that to their gamut of information that they're giving you. And the good local guides will be able to do that without a problem. And I certainly encourage it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to read you a story. This is another myth. And I'm just scrolling through the pages here just to find it. Here we go. Here's another myth. So sometimes when you travel around in the lodges, you encounter these apocryphal stories. And sometimes it's the same story again and again and again. There's that very, very famous one about the guy who got into bed with a hot water bottle, thought it was an animal, stabbed it to death. This animal's now got such a fright, he's killed it, it's pissed itself, there's wee all over the place. That story, I've even told it here before, and you hear it time and time and time again. The other story that you hear frequently, apocryphal, is there's a lizard on the bed. And, the lady goes to the manager and said, there's a lizard. And he's like, don't worry about those things. Those little geckos, they eat mosquitoes. They're your friend. Don't panic. And, and ultimately when the lady says to him, listen, you've really got to come and check this thing out. It turns out that it's a legovine lying on the bed and it's about 4 feet long. So these stories are always told as truths. And I want to read you one, which I've encountered several times. But this one was actually told me, and I think it actually did happen to him, by a guide called Hansi, who used to guide with Grant and me at Mala Mala Game Reserve years and years ago. And I'm going to read this one for you. And this story is called I Could Have Lost My Bloody Nuts. So for the sake of the book, I called him Harry, but Grant, you remember him. You remember Hansi, don't you?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Still talk to him every now and again.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So here's the story, or the legend. It goes like this. Harry swears blind that this really happened to him, but so did prognosis at Mana Pools in Zimbabwe. Some Africans have rather surprising names. I knew a Botswana woman called Surprise. And in Namibia, there lives a young Himba man known as Mistake. Don't even ask. Perhaps it happened to both Harry and Prognosis. All I know is that every time I pass an area like that on foot, I observe a simple rule of behavior. Walk behind it, not in front. Watch out for the Kalahari Ferrari. There are a couple of stories about Harry, actually. I guided with him at Mala Mala, a place that inculcated the discipline of being on time. Actually, not being on time, being early, and of giving maximum every waking moment attention to our guests. They were invaluable lessons for a life in the guiding industry, but at the time, they made for arduous working circumstances. We got very little sleep. Admittedly, there were many times when we could have gone to bed, but we stayed up instead with our fellow rangers, drinking at the Boma fire and telling outrageous lies of conquest and adventure. We were young, well, younger. But the point is that we were too often drowsy during the day, which is why Harry, badly hungover one morning on game drive, a sort of default position for him, told his guests that the leopard tracks he was pointing out were fresh and worth following up. His tracker, so we used to have, you'd have the ranger up front driving, and then you'd have a guy sitting, more of a spotter actually, sitting high up in the back of the vehicle. And his job was to use the flashlight at nighttime mostly and to help us get home because we were forever getting lost, but also for looking at the road to look at tracks. So Harry's tracker, Justice, could clearly see that those leopard tracks were yesterday's paw prints. And he chuckled to himself as Harry told his guests in Titus Oatsian fashion that he was going to follow them on foot and might be some time. Not very far from the car, yet out of sight of the guests, on a sloping river bank and in the warmth of the gentle sun, Harry had a little lie down. He awoke in a panic half an hour later, dashed back to the car to the visibly agitated guests, proclaimed that nothing had come of the tracks, and drove away. The woman sitting behind Harry leaned forward and brushed the dried leaves and grass from his back and hair. "So you were looking for the leopard in the trees, were you?" she asked. But back to the main story. Many bush guides claim that one of the highlights of their morning is the boskak, literally a bush shit. We're a simple lot, it seems, and we take delight in the moment. Be that as it may, to enjoy it, there are some basics that need to be in place. Firstly, pick your spot well. Find a place that is discreet yet relatively open. You don't want tourists passing by and taking pictures. At a critical point in the process, after all, there can be no running away. This happened to me once in the Zambezi National Park near Victoria Falls. I had no idea that the tourist road was so close, and as I went about my business, two women came by in a lime green VW Beetle. They didn't stop for long once they had identified the creature marking as territory, but I'm sure I saw them take some surreptitious photos. This was in the days before Facebook, fortunately. Otherwise, that could have been compromising. But you don't want the toilet spots to be too hidden either. Far, far better, while at your ablutions, for you to spot an old Duggar boy buffalo wandering down the game towards you before he sees you. They're easily offended, boys.
I've got more.
Secondly, so first of all, choose your spot carefully. Secondly, remove your pants entirely. Trousers puddled around one's ankles will not do when there's running away to be done. And anyway, there's the issue of grass seeds and birds and insects to consider. Imagine what the rest of your day would hold with those alien nuisances amongst your nether regions. No, you hang your pants from a nearby branch. Third thing, remember the TP, the white gold, the loo paper. Unless you're all eco-friendly and use leaves or smooth stones. Some guides do, they really do. And make sure the stuff is within reach. Last thing to remember is the squat. Are you spry enough to hold the position? If not, get a grip on a handy tree or rocky outcrop. You may be there for a while. This is not the time to be reading the newspaper, however. Keep a sharp lookout. It's a loo with a view, but you need to keep your wits about you. Harry did not. Urgently in need of a morning constitutional one day, he once again bade his guests a brief farewell and set off to find elephants, following days-old spoor, his usual ruse. He chose to settle in a nice, open, sandy area that allowed some privacy, with a little hillock lightly vegetated by woolly caper bush behind him for protection, and a grand view before. It was perfect. He hung his khaki shorts in a useful twig and settled down. Almost immediately, he noticed a disturbance behind him, an echoing, shuffling, grunting, rustling kind of noise. Strange, he thought. There's only this little hill. What on earth? And then a horrible realization dawned. Oh, man. This is a termite mound, and the lovely, soft, sandy patch I'm on is freshly excavated. It's been dug out by, and with a sudden rush, the terrified warthog bulleted out of the burrow, its gleaming tusks foremost, its razor-sharp, viciously hooked tusks, thrusting aside the frail screen of overhanging vegetation that masked its burrow entrance and charging straight at Harry's exposed backside in a mad, horrified bid to escape. Harry did the only thing he could do. He stood up fast and bowed his legs. And the pig, in a cascade of red sand and furious snorts, barreled straight through between them. Straight through and onwards, never touching Harry. The tusks narrowly missing his legs and other sundries. By a whisker and by pure dumb luck, all thought of a comfortable boskak had disappeared now. Mute and pale, Harry gathered his clothing and his senses and walked swiftly back to the car. Justice was in stitches. Justice, the tracker, was in stitches, slapping his leg like a cartoon character, laughing in a high-pitched creak. And a guest said, "Jesus, Harry, this massive warthog just came screaming past the car at a hell of a rate. I don't know what was chasing it. It looked terrified. And why is Justice laughing so hard?" When Harry tells that story, he chain smokes and affects a sardonic expression. Justice Oaks, luckiest day of my life. Everyone talks about the warthog, but I could have lost my bloody nuts. Have you heard that one, Grant?
I have. I didn't know he bowed his legs. I hadn't heard that part. But he has told us before. I've heard it more than once. You know, we worked together at Harry's for a while, and he used to carry on about that bloody warthog and his nuts. So, yeah, it's a good story. I'd forgotten about it.
Good. Folks, Grant Nel, as you realize, and I worked at Mala Mala some time ago. In fact, Grant's the person who got Sue and I to Botswana too. He set up an interview for us with his boss, and that's how we ended up working together in northern Botswana some years later. He now lives in Kasane. He owns and manages a company called Last Chance Safaris, and I'm going to hand over to him now to give his reflections on myths, secrets, and fables of the guiding world. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Lloyd, and also thanks, Carmen, for setting this up as usual. It's a lot of fun doing this, and I'm very sad that I missed last month. It was a subject matter that I was really looking forward to, and unfortunately I couldn't make it. But anyway, be that as it may, you must have discussed quite a few myths last month, Lloyd, about hyenas.
Exactly. Yeah, hermaphrodites and all of the normal sort of stuff. We hopefully debunked some of them and created some others.
Yeah. Well, when you said to me, you know, would I join you this month, I was more than happy, of course. I love this format. I think it's so much fun. But then you said to me you're focusing on myths and secrets. And I have to admit that's a rather tough subject matter for me, you know. And you'll see why anyway. So, but correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, I think you're all muted. Thanks, Carmen. So you can't correct me if I'm wrong. So therefore, I must be right. But, a myth, as you've alluded to, Lloyd, is something believed, wholly believed, and shared as true. Okay. Whereas a secret is a purposeful hiding of the truth for a greater good. Not so. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually try and split this, my little segment here, my stories into two parts. And I'm going to deal with myths first. You've done a pretty good job of sort of dealing with the myths. I find it quite hard because I've never told a myth in my life. Everything I've ever said is absolutely true. My word is as good as gospel. But like gospel, you just have to have faith that it's true. Okay, and if it isn't, well, then that's a secret that I'm not going to share with you guys. Anyway, jokes aside, Google has pretty much stifled any sort of myth propagation in the guiding fraternity nowadays. Before Larry and Sergey opened their little business in that garage of their friends, guides could pretty much get away with all these massively fanciful tales because there's no real way to fact check them. And as some of you know, been with us, and certainly Lloyd knows this as well, that guides have an almost rapt audience in our hands. The people arrive, they're already enchanted by Africa, and they believe every little pearl of wisdom that's uttered by their guide. Sort of like a crowd at a MAGA rally.
You know, that's not today.
True. Anyway, I've literally been told on more than one occasion by guests, when I question a comment that they've made about an animal, they'll say, our guide at the last camp told us that, so it must be true. And over the years, you know, both Lloyd and I, now we spend a lot of time in the private guiding field, attaching with our group along with another guide, a local guide. And we let them sort of take the lead in their backyard. They've got lots of information. They've got their traditional myths and beliefs that they will tell you about, which I love. But I've also heard a lot of myths that are just misinformation. And they absolutely 100% believe it, as Lloyd has alluded to, and they pass it on to their guests in such scientific conviction that it takes a concerted effort to dispel and replace this myth with my own version of the gospel truth. And there's loads of them. The hyena myths we've mentioned now. To this day, last year I was correcting a guide after the fact that about hyenas being hermaphrodites. I thought that was a myth that had long been debunked, but no, you still hear it. I've heard myths about lions living for 40 years and elephants living to over 100 years. Don't even go near all the myths about snakes. I mean, there's just a gazillion of them. But, and here's the truth. The most common safari myth espoused by every guide out there. I don't know if you want to have a guess. Lloyd, you got any idea?
Gosh, Grant,
No?
I don't know. There's so many.
Okay, well, let me give you an idea. Number 2 is, trust me, I'm a guide.
Okay.
Okay. Number 1 is, Africa is safe.
Oh.
Ask Lloyd, that's absolute BS. Africa bites. Isn't that true, 46?
That's what it says here.
All right. Anyway, so now that I've cleared that up, and I did mention about the Australians, and that's the best myth guiding I've ever experienced anywhere, because you can literally go through their entire habitat and the geology and the animals and everything. There's a myth attached to it, and it all links together in these wonderful stories. And it is, if you ever get the chance, and I like to punt Africa, but that is some of the best guiding I've experienced, is that myth guiding in Uluru. Now, probably the best myth story I have actually comes from a Zim colleague, and I beg forgiveness for telling a secondhand story, but that's fine, because there's Harry, aka Scruff, story that you told now, and this is campfire, so anything goes around the campfire. Besides, I'm pretty sure Humphrey, and that's his real name, will forgive me. His story actually crosses over from myth to mysticism, but there's no ways to convince Humph otherwise. Now, this guy is an esteemed and phenomenal guide. His scientific knowledge is bar none. He's absolutely brilliant. But there's no ways that you can tell Humph in any uncertain terms that what he tells in the story is just a myth. It's not really true. And these are one of these guys that you can have this kind of conversation with. He won't feel upset about it. So anyway, the story goes that Humphrey was doing walking safaris in Monopools National Park. And Monopools National Park is featured on CAMPfire a few times. It is, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful places in Africa. I certainly would rank it up, and it's always hard to put these rankings together, but I would certainly put it in the top 10 national parks on the continent. And I can't say that I've been to them all, but I've been to a fair smattering. And I don't know how you feel, Lloyd, but I mean, if it's one of these places that we keep going back to and taking people to, it's got to be pretty good.
I agree.
And Humph does a lot of his guiding in Monopools. It's where he cut his teeth. He was a protege of many very well-known Zimbabwean guides. And Humphrey is a Shona, Humphrey Gumpo, Shona guy, big, tall guy. And he's got this enormous smile, and he's just a wonderful gentleman. Anyway, he was doing this walking safari in Monopools, and one of the greatest things about Monopools is the elephant viewing. The elephants there are very relaxed, they're very tolerant, you can get extremely close to them, and they are not perturbed at all. A lot of the guys that will actually collect some of the winterthorn pods, and they'll put them down in a little pile, and the guides, the elephants will come up and feed on the pods whilst you sit literally at their feet taking photographs whilst they do this. And it's one of their little tricks, the guide tricks there from Monopools. So for what happened to Humphrey to happen was really, really out of the norm. Anyway, they were on their walk, and one of the first things they found that morning was actually a dead vulture. They didn't know why it died, but they came across this dead vulture. And attached to Humphrey was a trainee guide. Often the Zimbabwean guys will have a trainee guide, an apprentice that comes up through the ranks with them. They teach them everything that they know. And it's why their system of guiding is one of the best on the continent. And unbeknownst to Humphrey, this guy, also Shona, decided that he wanted to take the head of the vulture. So whilst Humphrey was talking to the clients and not looking, this trainee guide just quickly cut the head off this dead vulture and popped it into his pocket. And they carried on their walk, and about an hour later, they came across one of these very, very calm bulls. And this bull was the antithesis of what Humphrey was expecting. And this bull turned around and gave Humphrey a full-blooded, serious charge. And Humphrey, really fearing for himself and his clients, dropped the elephant, shot it with his rifle, dropped the elephant. Elephant went down. There was a little bit of consternation. Everybody was very upset, but that didn't last too long. Eventually, Humphrey and the clients were sitting on the elephant, taking photographs of themselves on the elephant, and so on. And Humphrey was a little bit concerned. He couldn't understand why this had happened. And he eventually spoke to this guy, and he said, "Did you pick up anything whilst we were walking?" And the guy said, "Yes, I took the head off the vulture. You know, in African culture, the head of a vulture has the power to have all-seeing prophecy. And so there's a lot of mysticism surrounding the head of the vulture, and traditions and beliefs that go around the head of the vulture. But Humphrey had his own myth, and he believed that nobody should walk with any animal parts or products on them when they're in the bush, because the wildlife will know about it and they will attack you. And sure enough, Humphrey, this happened to him, and he had to drop this elephant, and he was absolutely livid with this trainee. He tore a strip off of him. And this trainee there was no doubt in his mind, he actually thought his apprenticeship was over. Humphrey really gave it to him with both barrels. Anyway, they finished their walk. Humphrey goes to the wildlife department and has to report the fact that he's now shot an elephant. And goes to the guys. They said, "Okay, well, take us to where the elephant is." So they go to where Humphrey shot the elephant, where it had dropped, where everybody had been sitting on the elephant, having their photograph taken, walking around the elephant, plucking a couple of hairs, you know, all of this sort of stuff. There was not a sign of this elephant except the imprint on the ground. What Humphrey had inadvertently done is he had knocked the elephant out cold. He had knocked it out cold. And he thought he had killed it. And consequently, there he was with all his clients hopping all over this thing. He believes that once again, because his intentions were clear that he didn't want to hurt the elephant didn't die. And there's no ways. And Humphrey is a very intelligent guy. But his mummy told him, and his grandmummy told him, that this is the myth, and it's 100% true. You cannot change the way that he thinks. So that's myths. Okay.
Grant, when Humphrey goes on safari, does he wear a leather belt and leather shoes?
He does. Yes.
Has he thought about that?
No, that won't count. You know, that's been processed. That's okay. You know, okay. I don't know. I haven't asked him, but I'm sure you would have an excuse. Anyway, so that's myths. Secrets are a whole other ball game. And I've through the years I've known guides, myself included, who will often keep information away from their clients. And we spoke about it not so long ago when we were talking about elephants, and you had that terrible tragedy, and you try to keep that secret away from your clients, Lloyd. But these secrets could be for a number of reasons. It could be because you don't want the truth about how dangerous Africa really is to alarm anyone. It could be because you want to protect your company from any sort of negative information. It may be because you want to cover your own ass from getting into trouble. Or it actually may be because you want your guests to have an absolutely incredible wildlife experience, and you're willing to hide the truth in order to do that. every so often, on the very rare occasion, a guide will keep a secret that encompasses all 4 of these reasons. And I am 100% guilty of that. Only once, and I was an accomplice. I had an accomplice. He was more of an instigator than an accomplice. And this goes back, and we spoke about it earlier, goes back to our times at Mala Mala. At the time, I was a very conscientious manager of the old Harry's camp at Mala Mala. And I did everything by the book. Real goody two-shoes. In South Africa, they've got a very good word for it. They say you are paraat, which means you do everything as you're supposed to do. Well, almost everything, but those are stories for another time. Now, at Harry's, I was the manager and ranger, and I was assigned a second ranger to help me out at Harry's. And the ranger that was assigned to help me at Harry's was probably sent there as punishment for never going by the book. Okay, and he was none other than 5'4" Wayne. And I'm so sorry that he's not on here tonight. He normally comes on, but do you know where he is right now, Lloyd?
Good day. Kruger National Park.
No, Mala Mala.
No ways.
Yeah, he's with his old man, and he's there at Mala Mala. So anyway, I need to put Wayne in context for this story. Wayne is a very independently minded individual. To this day, he still balks at being told how something should be done. And I can tell you, this makes for very interesting marital dynamics. As we all know, you get told how things should be done. And Sharon and I have actually dubbed those marital dynamics as the Wayne and Nessie show. And we often tease them about it. And if there's one red rag to a bull for Wayne, and we always say, don't tell Wayne don't, okay? Whereas I does things for me as well, but when I see a button labeled don't push, I will push it out of irresistible curiosity. Wayne will push the button because there's another label next to it that says by order of management. So that's Wayne. This is the guy who, if you told him you can't get a Land Rover in there, he will prove you wrong. And I saw this on one occasion where there was, I think it was the Imlawati male leopard was down in the Sand River lying on a rock. And we were all viewing this leopard from 80 meters away because it was inaccessible from the top of the bank. And Wayne arrived and he said, I can get in there. And the senior ranger said, no, Wayne, you can't get in there. Don't go in there, Wayne. Well, that's red rag to bull. So he got in there. He got right up to this leopard, got the best photographs. It didn't matter that he couldn't get out and needed to be rescued. And it also didn't matter that I think he still holds the record at Mala Mala for breaking the most number of vehicles in the shortest space of time. I think it was 7 vehicles in 2 days. So I think you're sort of getting the picture about who Wayne is. Now, here's the situation. It was the middle of the rainy season. It was an exceptionally good rainy season, and the Sand River was in full spate. Not quite bank to bank, but it was still pretty full. Which this sounds cool. It sounds pretty great. But Harry's camp, for the guests at Harry's camp, it was actually the worst possible scenario. You see, where Harry's camp was situated on a part of Mala Mala called Toulon, we were sort of exiled into the furthest corner of the reserve. And when the river was so full, every single river crossing was closed by order of management. So Wayne and I had, for the last few days with a group of clients, been doing 3-hour game drives, pretty much never getting out of first gear on a postage-size stamped piece of land that had the sum total of 3 herds of impala and 2 giraffe. And we're trying to eke out a 3-hour game drive on this little patch of land because we couldn't get over the river to the better side. And there's only so much inane information you can dredge up about insects and flowers over and above impala and giraffe facts. The guests were bored, and I was bored, which basically made me ripe for Wayne to pick. He came to me after another non-game game drive, and in his usual sort of subtle manner, he dropped the suggestion that we cross the river at Rocky Crossing for the afternoon game drive. Now, rangers at Mala Mala had been fired for much less. And Rocky Crossing, despite being a concrete causeway, was officially closed with a capital C, okay? This causeway was covered by brown, muddy, rushing water. It was deep enough that driving over it, the driver would actually be sitting in the river, and the water would be rushing over you as you went through the river. It'd be over the bonnet, and the causeway is only a vehicle wide, and on either side of that causeway is a deep drop off. If you can't see the causeway, and if you leave the causeway, it would sweep the vehicle downstream and any occupants, and it would be a tragedy, basically. Could end up in a tragedy. On top of that, the causeway is slightly curved. It's not a straight causeway, so you can't just take aim at the opposite bank and go. You actually needed to get across that causeway knowing exactly which way you're going and where you are at any given time. Now, we did that causeway just about every day. We could do it with our eyes closed, but still, it's very disconcerting to actually do it with your eyes closed. And if you make a mistake, then it's whoops, you're gone. Now, Wayne, of course, I said no. I said, hell no. Hell no again. We're not doing that. We're just going to have to suck it up and do these shitty game drives on 15 or 20 acres that we've got available to us. But Wayne actually comes from a long line of car salesmen, and I was just no match. He chipped away until I eventually caved. And I said, okay, so long as we do a dry run, which was obviously a wet run. So we went down to the crossing, and we tested out Wayne's rather astute idea of stringing a chain between the two of us and going across in tandem. You know what? It was actually a cinch. A little scary, very wet, but in actual fact, it was a cinch. We did it quite easily. There are a few other technical things we had to do. We had to take off the fan belt, so the fan didn't spray water all over the electrics, because these were petrol Land Rovers. We had to seal the distributor with silicone so that the points didn't cut out. If you cut out in the middle of the river, that was the worst possible scenario. So anyway, the wet dry run went quite well. So that afternoon at tea, I made the official announcement that Rocky Crossing was crossable, and we would be heading to the other side for some game viewing, which of course had great whoops and shouts from the clients. They were all very happy. So now the secrets are starting to mount up.
Grant, did you tell them that did you say that you had official sanction from on high, or did you just miss?
No, that was an unofficial sanction. Yeah. So there was no mention, first secret, no mention that the crossing was still closed with a capital C. There was no mention that Wayne and I could be sacked with a capital S. And there was no mention that this was actually quite dangerous. No, this was dangerous with a capital F. Okay. So, but it didn't stop there. As the secrets mounted up, so Wayne cooked up a few more, of which by now I'm so in, I acquiesced to them. So we devised a code language so to use if we found anything of interest. We couldn't let on an open channel where we were, or if we had a high profile animal, because, you know, we can't let the cat out of the bag. The other rangers want to know where we are, what we're seeing. And of course, the boss is always monitoring the radio channel. And we agreed to return to the crossing before sunset so that we could get across whilst it was still light. And that was one of my conditions. And I had one other condition. And this was a very important one, probably the one I was most worried about. We agreed that Wayne would actually look after his vehicle for a 3-hour game drive and not have a breakdown on the wrong side of the river where we'd actually have to ask somebody to come and rescue us and we'd end up getting fined. So the practice crossing was a cinch, but I can tell you it didn't feel that way when it was time to go across that river with a vehicle full of packs. Wayne is in front. He's also chained. I'm feeling very responsible for his clients as well. So it wasn't a cinch. And I need to describe for you exactly what the scene is like. You come down off the bank and you're looking at a river, the pace of which is actually quite scary. Just downstream is actually white water, as the rocky crossing was named because it was a fairly rocky area that they'd put a causeway over. And so the river there has actually got some white water. So when you approach it, there's all this white water off to your right. And you can see the road coming out the other side, and this water is muddy brown. And you know where you're going, but the clients, they put all their faith in you, and they can't see where they're going. You're just going into water. They have no idea.
The minor issue of, should we mention the minor issue of pods of hippos and large crocodiles as well? Oh,
exactly. There's that on top of the fact that you could drown.
Just by the way, yeah.
Yeah. Africa's safe. I promise you, Africa is safe. So you come upon the scene, and now your guide just drives into the river. Literally just drives into the river with all this confidence. But now you're chained together, so I don't know how confident the clients felt. But we're chained together. Wayne's going, and he's going through. I'm right behind him. And now it is guesswork where the kink in the causeway is, because if you get it wrong by a yard or two, you're a wheel off, and then it's just you start to tilt the vehicle, the water gets under you, and whoops, off you've gone. So you know this is it's sphincter pinching. Let's be honest about it. My sphincter is in the river. I'm sitting in water. My shoes are up on the dashboard, my shoes and socks. The clients are sitting with their feet on the seat and their butts on the backrest of the vehicle, because the wheel well, or the well of the vehicle behind me, is completely underwater. They're holding their camera gear on their laps, etc., and everything's getting wet. But we get through. We get through without a problem, really, except for the nervousness. It wasn't a problem. And then we proceeded to have a pretty fantastic game drive. It was, I remember quite clearly, the two highlights were a group of rhino and a single cheetah on an open plain in the afternoon light. It was just, we had a really, really good game drive. And it wasn't impala and giraffe only. We saw a whole bunch of stuff, and we had a really, really good game drive. And then dash back to the crossing at sunset to get back across that river before the sun went down, which we did. So we had that one more sphincter pinching crossing to get to the other side, had our sundowners, and in actual fact the chain hitch up went off without a hitch, which was pretty cool. So mission accomplished. The guests were thrilled with their afternoon, and none the wiser to any of the risks and dangers. Our bosses were equally in the dark. Plus, we complained bitterly for weeks afterwards about how poor a game drive we had that afternoon. That's why you couldn't hear us on the radio. We had to add a little bit of substance to the ruse. But most importantly, the two of us got fairly decent sparks, which is another secret. And that's what us guides call tips. So all in all, a pretty well-kept secret. up until tonight. Thank you very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed that.
So what I want to know, did you guys drive in tandem the entire time, or did you separate yourselves while you crossed the river?
No, we separated. We set up, we wouldn't go further north than the Charleston-Flockville boundary. And we pretty much stayed in that area because we knew the guys that could cross up at the bridge weren't going to come down there. So we had all this code for different places and junctions and animals and all sorts of stuff. Like I found a chameleon, which was actually the cheetah.
Okay, so you were using the radio.
We were using the radio, so we kept in touch. We knew what we were doing, but it was, and the other guys listening on the channel must have thought, these poor bastards.
Yeah,
they're making a big thing about finding a chameleon.
Okay. So that's what I want to lead on to, actually, is that Grant alluded to this earlier, actually, is that part of the secret, I think you described the secret as something where you don't tell the truth, but for the greater good. What was your definition?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, it's something where you hide the truth, but for a greater good.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the game of secrets or games guides play that I'm referring to here, it is exactly that. The reality is, there's a strange bit of echo here. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you twice.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're back. Okay. What you do as a guide is you've only got people on your vehicle or in the car with you or walking with you on a boat who have a pretty limited time. Africa's quite a long way away from anywhere else, especially the bottom end of it where we tend to operate. It's expensive to get there. It can be expensive to stay at some of the lodges, not necessarily. But the pressure is on the guide to produce the goods, right? And everybody who goes on a safari is desperately hoping to see all the cool stuff. They will obviously pay attention to birds and insects and flowers and trees and all that sort of thing. But basically, they've been sold a kind of a package which involves large animals. And what they want to see is lions and leopards and cheetahs and rhinos and buffaloes, giraffes, zebras, the Disney stuff. The easiest, and that tends to be the easiest stuff to find. But as a guide, you can be under severe pressure to track all this stuff down. Now, the worst way that you could possibly do that is to simply set off on your own, because you would find some, you might find all of it, but it would take a very lucky day and a lot of skill to be able to find just in a couple of game drives, if you entirely are on your own, all the stuff that your guest would love to see. And a lot of the time, these folk are only out there once. Right? This is one African safari in their life. And so you're really trying as hard as you can to make it as efficient as you can. And therefore, you have radios on the cars. That's why I asked Grant that question. And the reason you have radios is because you've got to swap sightings. You've got to be able to talk to each other and say, listen, guys, I've got a group of rhinos in such and such a place, and I know that you're over in a leopard sighting over there, and it's not all that far away. You make up your own mind. The rhinos look stable, they're peaceful, they're relaxed, they're grazing, don't seem to be going anywhere. You can decide whether you're going to take a chance and try and get here in time, or what I'll do is I'll wait here at the sighting with them so that if they move, then I'll be able to bring you in on the sighting. That's great. But the problem with that is that it can reduce the excitement of the experience. And as a guide, what you try to do is to give the guests the impression, well, I should say new guides more really, is you give the guests the impression that you have found everything. Now, anybody who's got any sort of real sense knows that that's not how it works. But the reality is if you on a game drive with your guide and you come around the corner and there's a herd of buffaloes there and there's no other car in sight, it feels like you are the only ones there, and quite often you are. Or there might only be 2 or 3 cars at most. And then you drive on for 20 minutes and suddenly you find lions mating in an open area, and it seems like your guide is the one who's found them. The reality is, of course, that somebody else has found them and told you where they are. and then you go and you take in the sighting. And it needs to be that way, because imagine the disappointment if you get back to the lodge in the evening and everybody else is talking about having seen lions, and your greatest hope was to see lions, and you did see some rhinos, and you saw an elephant, and you saw some buffaloes, and you didn't see lions, and your guide says to you, don't worry about it, there's lots of lions here. And then it starts raining or something happens, the wind comes up, and the whole of the next day is a bit of a loss, a dead loss, and you don't see those lions, and you leave the game reserve, you might leave Africa, and your dream has not been fulfilled. And it can't work that way. That's, we have to, as guides, we need to be better than that. And so we play an entirely legitimate game of secrets. And the game of secrets revolves around the radio. Now, I remember the very first game drive that I ever went on, and I'm going to read a short section of a story to you. The story is called Game of Secrets, and it starts this way. The two-way radio clicked, catching my attention. There was a short hissing pause in my earpiece, because at this game reserve we used to listen privately to the conversations so that the guests couldn't hear. And then a ranger's voice said excitedly, and Grant, I want you to interpret or translate this for me, please.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Stations? The Mkulu Mhlambi and Nyati have belegged from the Hlatini into the Umfolen. I think there might be in Gonyams about.
The large herd of buffalo has run away from, they run into the river. I think there might be a big group of lions around.
Correct, exactly. So when we use these words, Mkulu Mhlambi and Nyati have belegged from the Hlatini into the Umfoleni because of the Ngonyams, I'm on game drive as a new young guide going, what the hell? That language is called Fanagalo. And Fanagalo is a pidgin English lingua franca. It's used across southern Africa. It originates on the mines. It's when people from all the different ethnic groups came together to work on the mines in South Africa, and they all speak different languages. And so this language has evolved so that everybody can speak one language. And we sort of borrowed that. We mixed it up with a bit of Shangaan, which was the language of the people at Mala Mala Game Reserve. And we used that language, and it was good fun. And we used that language. We spoke out that language so that the guests on the cars didn't have an idea what we were talking about. And I remember thinking at the time, why didn't we just say it in plain English? Why are we hiding this? But then the answer very quickly became apparent. There's two reasons, and they're excellent reasons. First of all, you want to keep the suspense. So if I want to take my guests to the big herd of a Nyati, the Mkulu Mhlambi Nyati, I'm not going to say to the guest, oh, okay, guys, so now next on the menu is a big herd of buffaloes. They're in the river. I'm dead certain we're going to see them. They're probably 20 minutes away. They're going down to drink. It's not going to be a problem. The guests are going to go like, so, what's the big deal? They're only buffaloes anyway. What are those big cows? They don't get the thing about buffaloes until they see them. And so what you got to do is you got to keep it a secret. And it's a legitimate and important secret. You then, having left whichever sighting you are at, drive in the direction, listening on your radio, and the guests can't hear what's been said, or if they can hear, it's in this Fanagalo, so they haven't got a clue what's going on. And you're listening in, and you're figuring it out, and you're playing the game, and you're trying to decide when to go into the sighting, and you're listening to the other guys, and they're telling you what the buffaloes are doing, and you're working it all out. And what you're doing is you're creating a perfect game drive experience for the guests. And then you come over the lip of the river, and below you are spread out 1,000 buffaloes, all mooing, and there's all sorts of birds associated with them. There might even be some lions in attendance watching to see if they've got a chance. And it's a very dramatic moment. And it's very important to set the whole thing up. What guides do is it's like magic, right? And the last thing you do in a magic trick is the reveal. You suddenly create that sensation. You create that moment where the whole audience goes, oh, how do they do that? And it's even better if you are the only person at the sighting. And so the game that we used to play was, we would let the guests think that we were the ones who had found everything. Now, anybody who's been on safari a few times will start to pick up the tricks. They might start to learn the Shangaan names for animals or places and what the intentions are, what the verbs are. Balega means to run. And they go like, oh, what's running? Where's it running to? They start to pick up the tricks. And it's good fun. If you can create a situation where you tick off lions and leopards and cheetahs and wild dogs, the hunting dogs, and so on, and you're only one or possibly the only vehicle there, you have just absolutely, what you've done is you've under-delivered. I mean, oh, no, the other way around, but you've under-promised, but you've over-delivered on the safari, and it creates the most incredible vibe on the car, and people get so excited about all of this. And then they go back to Boma, which is where you have dinner. You sit outside under the stars in a large enclosure. You've had a beer and some red wine, and the flames are leaping into the sky, and everybody's happy, and they're swapping stories and pictures. And they'll say things like, my God, we saw some lions. We found lions. We tracked lions today. And the other guests will go like, yeah, we also saw some lions. And the rangers look at each other, knowing it's exactly the same lions, but the guests don't know that. They think the place is just thick and teeming with lions. And it's just harmless fun, and it's all designed to enhance the guest's experience. It's about creating mystery and illusion and making the guests feel special. So it's necessary secrets. But Grant, I'll ask you this question. What do you do if you are the first guide at a sighting? You're the one who found the leopard tracks. You did all the work. You spent an hour on this thing. You heard the alarm calls of the bushbuck. You heard the monkeys chattering. You lost the leopard. You picked it up again, and now it settles down. And now your guests have got this special experience. When do you share it? At what stage? What's the ethic in terms of telling everybody on the radio what you've done and what you found? How do you handle that?
That's not an easy one to answer, because it always depends on the actual situation at the time. In general, I soak up as much as I possibly can of the sighting before I call anybody in. But if I know that I was working with somebody, another guide who was working the tracks as well, I let them know. If I know that there's a particular thing that everybody's been after for a long time, or the sighting is fluid, you let them know straight away. But if it's something that you can soak up for as long as you want, that's what you do. And then you call the people in. And you make it sound like you've just found it.
Exactly. So what you do is you soak it up for 20 or 30 minutes, or however long you think you can get away with it and be fair to everybody else. And then you call it just before you're ready to leave, because you know that there's somebody else in the vicinity and they're going to come straight and they'll be there in 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Right? That's how you manage that situation. Your guests have spent as much time tracking it as you have. You know, you've involved them in the whole process. It's tremendously exciting, unfolding the story, you know, unpeeling it layer by layer. You deserve your time. And I messed it up badly once at Mala Mala. Most of our stories, well, all of them tonight are Mala Mala stories, it seems, and there was no tracking. It was pure blind luck, because that's what happens sometimes. If you spend enough time out there, sometimes you're going to get lucky. There is a cheetah. There's only one species of cheetah in the world. It's spread across the Middle East and Africa. And they have spots. That's what the word cheetah means in Hindi. Spotted one. But sometimes you get an aberrant cheetah, and it's called a king cheetah. And it is the most beautiful animal you have ever seen. And the spots coalesce and they form stripes. And it very seldom happens. It's an entirely natural thing. You can, of course, breed them up that way if you choose. And I found one at Mala Mala on Game Drive. There was a female. I think she had 2 cubs, Grant. It might have been more. Do you remember?
One of the cubs was a king as well.
And one of the cubs was a king.
Yep.
So it was the most exciting thing. And she'd been around and I hadn't seen her. And one day on Game Drive, I just bumped into her. She was crossing the road in front of me. I was lucky, one of the luckiest things that's ever happened. And it's mind-boggling how beautiful this animal, a cheetah is beautiful anyway, but to see this animal with stripes instead of spots it's stupefying. Now, the other game that we play, Game of Secrets, is you get accolades if you're the guy who finds it, right? Everybody wants to be the one who found the thing. And then you can call it. And it's very satisfying. And it was like, oh, that guy's good, jeepers. He's found the cheetah again, or he's found the leopard again. I was so excited, and I wanted to be the one that called it. And the problem was that cheetah was in an open area. And any car driving in the vicinity would have seen that cheetah. And ego was at play. And I wanted to be the one who called it because I found it. And I called it within seconds of seeing it. And it's such an unusual sighting that every vehicle on Mala Mala came powering from every corner of the reserve to see it. And the result was that I had to relinquish the sighting far more quickly than I would have liked to. I was probably only there for 10 or 15 minutes. And she was on the move. She was actually hunting with these two little cubs behind her, only a couple of months old. One spotted, normal spotted, and one a little king cheetah. She had a beautiful heart shape on her hip, I remember. So in that case, what I should have done was hung on to that sighting just for a little bit longer. But there was great jubilation. And that brings me to the next point that I want to make, is that the guests get involved in this Game of Secrets as well. And Grant, I'm sure that you've had this before, where the guests they want you to keep the secret too. So they don't want you to tell anybody else what you found.
Yep, absolutely.
They put you under a lot of pressure.
Not really. Not anymore. Maybe then, back in those days, but not anymore. Now I go, yeah, right, I agree with you. Let's keep it for ourselves for a bit longer.
Okay.
I'm right with them.
But so what happens is, and again, it's an example, but this time it's from a place called Mambo Camp in Botswana, where again, it was two cheetahs that were hunting. I was a very long way away from them. And so, it was a good hour's drive. And so I just said to them, the guest that I was with had learned the names of all the animals in Setswana. And he heard, and there we didn't have radio earpieces, the radio, it was open channel. We still used Setswana names for the animals, but he had learnt them all. He's a very regular safari goer. And so an extremely competitive man in business, in his personal life and on safari. And when the cheetah sighting was called, he heard it called, and we were having coffee, and he said, come on, we've got to go, because they were hunting. And we drove quite gently there. I didn't allow him to put me under very much pressure. And when we got there, the cheetahs were still hunting, and it was about 11 in the morning, and everybody slowly, we're the last car at the sighting, and everybody finally went home for brunch. They'd been out since 5 in the morning. And he said to me, let's just follow these cheetahs. And I was dead keen to do that. You can eat anytime. So, and we watched them, and it was staggeringly exciting because they hunted a Sesame antelope, and the calf drove it into a river, drowned it, got it out, then lost it to hyenas, and then the hyenas were replaced by lions. The vultures came in. So it was lots and lots of drama. And this is where the Game of Secrets can go slightly wrong, because when we got back to camp at about 3 in the afternoon, that guide was that guest was so triumphant that he started, trumpeting what had happened to all the guests, and very insensitive of him. And so the rest of the guests felt very angry that they'd been denied all this tremendous excitement, and they wanted to know why I hadn't called it on the radio. But in fact, I had called it on the radio repeatedly. But all the guides were back at camp taking siesta, and their cars were parked in the garage, and nobody was, or if those guides were hearing me, They were just ignoring it because they wanted a rest and they didn't want to go out and game drive until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, by which stage the whole drama was over. And so that game of secrets that we play, if the guests sort of latch on to how it all works, then it can put you under some sort of pressure as well. I don't know if, Grant, if you've had a similar experience to that.
Yeah, I have, but it wasn't quite as intense. I have had, but not quite as intense. One of the other little secrets that you just reminded me about is it more sort of goes to the tricks that guides play. When you're keeping a sighting secret, and it's something good, like a leopard has got to kill up a tree. It's a static sighting, and the guys have come and gone, and you know where it's going to be. And someone has surreptitiously dropped a branch in the middle of the road to mark the spot where you can drive off-road. And you get to that spot where you see the branch, and then you stop your vehicle, and you sniff the air. You say, yeah. Can you smell that? And they go, what? You say, no, I can smell cat pee, or I can smell stomach contents, or I can, they go, what? No, I can't smell anything. And now I've got to go and investigate this. And you drive off-road, but there's a leopard up a tree with a kill. So that's just one of those little tricks that guys like to play to
all in good spirit.
Add to the secret and that incredible aura that you develop of the whole thing, as you mentioned. You know, it's all about the clients having a really special time.
It's got to be special. Otherwise, you might as well just go to a zoo and go and tick them all off.
Exactly.
You know, what we do is something very different. I'm going to finish off, folks. I said it's 8:30, so I'm going to finish off with just a very brief, short story. And it still relates about the game of secrets. I had some guests, also Mala Mala Game Reserve, a Spanish family. Now, you know, the Spaniards have and actually I see Alberto is on here, so he might be able to back me up on this thing, but the Spaniards are not known for getting up early, but they are known for going to bed late. That's their style. All, of course, weather and tradition related. And Spaniards on safari is a slightly unusual thing. And safari, your daily routine is the exact opposite of a typical Spanish day. In fact, these guys were Mexican, but the same sort of lifestyle and approach to daylight hours. So I said to the guy, I met him at Johannesburg airport, and we flew to Mala Mala and explained the whole thing. I'd not met him before. And I said, we get up at 5 o'clock and we have a quick coffee, and then, you know, and we go out, and he's like, no breakfast. I said, no, you just quickly have that, and you dunk a rusk in your coffee, and off you go quickly. The sun's coming up, the lions are walking, it's all happening, you've got to move. And he's like, I don't know about this, it's dark. I said, well, look, I'm just telling you how it normally works. And then we come back, then we have a hearty brunch, and then, you know, we sleep, then we take siesta. He liked that bit. And then we go out in the afternoon, and we come back and have dinner at 8. What do you mean 8? 8? No, he said, that's too early. We can't eat at 8. I said, well, that's when we're all going for dinner. And you know, the reason is because we're getting up at 5. So we eat and finish about 11ish or something, and then, you know, we go to bed, we get 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and then the whole thing happens again. He says, no, 11 o'clock, that's when we start thinking about what to order. He said, I don't know about that, I can't eat so early. I said, all right, look, it's just you and your family, it's just me, it's a private vehicle, we've got some scope for maneuver here. I said, but why don't you just try it tomorrow, work with me on this, and let's just see. Well, they were two teenage girls and a teenage son. I tell you, you don't have to be Mexican to struggle to get those kids out of bed anyway. But we managed to do it. I think we managed to get out of camp at like 7:30 or so. It's like herding cats. They were just all over the place and sleeping on the car and complaining that we hadn't had breakfast. And the coffee wasn't good. That was the other thing. I remember that too, that they complained that the coffee was very poor indeed. And I think they were right about that. We went out on game drive and we saw good stuff, lots of stuff. We come back at about 12ish, and the guy pulls me over and he says, so you guys talk to each other on the radio, right? In that language, whatever that language is. I said, yeah, we do. He said, so you know where everything is? I said, yeah, sort of. I mean, it could move, but basically, when they're telling me, I know where it is. He said, and what are the chances of things moving? I said, look, if it's a leopard with a kill, it's probably not going to move. It might be in the area at least. There's a pretty good chance. It depends on the animal. If the buffaloes are settled down, they'll probably still be in the same place. Elephants move, you never know. Depends. He says, okay, but how confident are you that you could find it? If you ask everybody where the stuff is, and then we went there, would you find it? I said, yeah, I think so. Pretty confident. He goes, all right, so what we do is tomorrow, because we're there for 3 nights, what we do tomorrow is we all sleep until we finish sleeping. And then we have breakfast about 10, 11. Okay. Then we go out. I said, hey, it's hot. It's 35 degrees Celsius. Those animals are going to be in the shade. The photographs are going to be terrible. It's going to be hot. He said, I'm Mexican. What do you mean hot? I'm not worried about the heat. Heat's not a problem. Pictures, we don't take pictures. There's no cameras here. We don't care about that. He said, what we want to do is sleep and then go have one game drive. You take us to everything. You know where it is because all your friends told you. Then we'll enjoy that. And then we come back and then we drink and that. And you need to talk to the kitchen because there's no ways we're eating at 8 o'clock. That can't happen. No, 10 o'clock at the earliest. And that's what we did. And I'm going to tell you, we went out the next day and we ticked off the big 5 in about 90 minutes. Every single thing was exactly where the rangers had said they were. We were a bit lucky. But we went straight there and we came back from that game drive and he spent the whole afternoon at the pool just drinking and enjoying himself and suntanning. He's like, I don't understand why it takes a Mexican to come all the way to the bottom of Africa to tell you people how to do your job.
He has a point. He has a point.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Folks, that's it for this evening. Grant, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, Lloyd, thank you, and thanks Carmen as well. I see the little record button is on.
Yes, it is.
Is it? Wayne asked if he could, because he's so sad that he was missing today.
Okay.
He asked if there's any way to get a copy of the recording.
Yeah.
Or how does it work?
Absolutely. I'll post it on Facebook and on Twitter, so you'll be able to track it there. Or okay. I can email it to you if you prefer.
No, I've seen it all. I don't need to see it again. Once is enough.
No, but
Wayne wants.
But he's at Mala Mala having all of these. He's living these stories live.
Yeah, he is. They don't do it quite like we did in the old days. Now they got bridges and all sorts of things, and I don't know. Everything seems to be so much easier there nowadays. It's I sound like an old man. I look like an old man. I should have had a shave tonight.
And Lloyd, in from roster there. Just have a quick look.
Folks, thank you once again. We're going to meet again on the 3rd of December. I'm going to move it to 6 p.m. UK time because I sort of miscalculated. It's if you're in Southern Africa right now, you're 2 hours ahead. So it's keep us 10:30 at night there.
Oh my Lord, it's way past my bedtime.
I know, straight to bed, Grant, after a Jack Daniels, of course.
Yes, of course.
So I'm going to move it to 6 so that it starts at 8 o'clock in South Africa or across Africa next time. And we'll be talking about migration, lots of different kinds of migration. I've got some very, very interesting migration stories, not just the wildebeest migration of East Africa, but many others besides. And there's some incredible stuff coming out in terms of bird migration at the moment. So we'll be chatting about that. That'll be our thing.
Right, well, thank you, Lloyd, and thank you to your audience and to Carmen and everybody. It was fun.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all. Nice to be here again.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Kim. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Grant.
Keep us
Yeah,
spirits.
Thank you, Lloyd, Grant, Carmen. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Yes, it was me hiding in the corner there.
Hi, Tish.
Hi, how are you?
Right.
That was brilliant. I particularly liked the last story.
Yeah, Mexican style.
Yeah, really all good fun. And you're
Good.
okay and Sue's okay?
Both very well. Thank you. Sue's sitting upstairs. All good. Enjoying lockdown day one. You know, what an opportunity.
Well, we'll catch up. We'll catch up in a month and see everyone still. See if everyone is still smiling.
Yeah, exactly. So the next one on the 3rd of December is exactly one day after the end of lockdown. So
Yeah. And Heather and Derek said they're going to watch that one. It's Heather's birthday today.
okay. Oh, is it?
Yeah, and Derek turns 60 at the end of the month, so they're all in depths of depression about their birthdays, but they're fine.
Just for everybody's interest, I met Tisha in Sri Lanka about 2 years ago.
Yeah, and we were tracking tigers, and did we find a tiger?
Yeah,
Did
no,
we
it was a
see
leopard.
anyone? No.
Yeah. Yeah, we found a
Okay.
leopard there.
Good luck, and see you in a month.
Okay.
All
Keep
right.
well, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bram van Wyk, it's good to see you on board. You're muted.